Clashes in Venezuela have turned deadly as thousands are taking to the streets to protest Nicolas Maduro's claim that he won the presidential election. Now, at least 16 people have died and nearly 750 have been arrested for demonstrating.
Venezuela was once among South America's wealthiest countries, oil-rich and governed by a well-functioning democracy. But the country that has been ridden with years of political corruption now finds itself in freefall. Yesterday, one demonstrator said, quote, "How is it possible that all of this is happening for nothing more than damn politics, for a government that doesn't want us to be free?" Hill staff writer who covers Latin America, Rafael Bernal, now joins us to discuss how we arrived at this moment and the history behind it. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, my pleasure, as always.
So a lot of people I've seen, especially on the right in America, are framing this as the people of Venezuela denouncing having any kind of socialist government and wanting free trade with the world, especially American companies in the region. How do you contextualize this moment in history and in politics?
That's a great question. In Venezuela, it hasn't been, socialism hasn't been the issue, really. The issue has been undemocratic practices, which we've seen for 25 years, just worsen and worsen ever since Hugo Chavez took over. And frankly, the opposition back then, before the 1998 election that he won, warned that somebody who had staged a coup against the democratic government in 92 would obviously not build democratic structures. So it's really, you really have to separate the economic, sort of the ideological goals as stated, because these are not the ideological goals the Venezuelan government has pursued, from their governance goals as stated and executed exactly the way Hugo Chavez and Nicolás Maduro have intended.
Sure, although of course the economic situation in Venezuela, is related to the political repression and the people's discontentment with the regime. Right, it is not solely that it's not a functioning democracy and that they don't have say in it, but is also, the material condition of Venezuelans that they live under having, deteriorated so much over the last several years. What do you think? Are these protests going to be effective? Do they stand any chance of achieving the correct results in the election, being made public or being implemented in some way?
They stand a chance. Of course, they stand a chance. The Maduro's regime is relatively a small structure compared to the size of the country, but they have been very effective at past times when protests have come up, usually because of those economic conditions, because of their own economic mismanagement. They just wait it out. And most observers, not to be too pessimistic here, but they expect Maduro to wait it out. They have more than enough resources. They have the international allies they need, though not the ones they would want. They now have Cuba, Iran, Russia, and China. They would have liked to keep Brazil and Colombia, but the way this election was carried out and the very credible allegations of massive fraud are scaring away those two key allies, Colombia and Brazil, and their leftist governments. Not so much Mexico. Mexico's trying to have it both ways, with President López Obrador sort of on the way out the door and sort of saying he said he's going to take the Venezuelan Electoral Authority at its word and certify whenever they reach 100%, whenever they say they've reached 100% vote count.
I really want to get your take on this. Now, a U.S. General, Laura Richardson of Southcom, spoke at the Aspen Security Conference the week before last. She spoke about China's Belt and Road Initiative in Latin and Central America and how the U.S. needs to counter this with some kind of Marshall Plan. She said directly, "We have a lot of companies in the region. I don't think we're branding Team USA as we should. It should be better." This sounds like a lot of what we've heard in the past about the United States favoring covert operations to ensure countries abroad are friendly to multinational corporations based in the U.S., basically using the foreign policy arm and CIA of the United States to fight for the interests of America's elites and biggest business owners. Are you concerned about this rhetoric and how this might be shaping how the U.S. responds to Venezuela at a point where it feels like there's political instability?
There's two sides to that. If NAFTA, USMCA have taught us anything, is that when the United States and the Latin American country treat each other as partners and have straight rules to follow, it doesn't matter that they might have different political views on U.S. intervention. And yes, Latin America is very feisty about the international role of the United States and of Europe, for that matter. They still, in a large part, view them as colonial powers, which they were, or interventionists, which they were. But Latin America has come a long way from the banana republics, and a lot of these countries have the wherewithal to negotiate with the United States, and they have negotiated with the United States, some more successfully than others. But the Latin American left views the term a Marshall Plan as a bad thing, which is sort of ironic. They don't view sort of the development of post-war Germany as a result of the Marshall Plan. They view the development of U.S. bases in post-war Germany as a result of the Marshall Plan. And of course, I mean, the without getting too far into sort of the ideological debate the United States knows now, has 30 years or at least a quarter century of experience on how to successfully deal on economic and political and security terms with Latin America. The security side, it's a little bit weaker, but the Colombian example might provide some paths to having better cooperation on that end. The United States also knows, because of 2 centuries of experience, how not to deal with Latin America, and it's really up to U.S. policymakers, and as everything, this election in November in the United States will mean that the United States will present a very different face toward the continent.
Right. I mean, I don't think a lot of people would be skeptical of the idea that the U.S. should get overly involved in, certainly not in regime change in Venezuela, even though the Trump administration, for instance, was supportive of the rival to Nicolas Maduro at the time, Juan Guaido, who ended up having to flee Venezuela and is now in the U.S. At the same time, will Venezuela's neighbors, as Maduro's allies, left-leaning allies running other countries, do they have anything to say about him, effectively stealing an election and governing totally outside democratic norms, something that, many on the left talk about the right being this threat to democracy, pointing to, very far right-leaning figures all over the globe who are seeking power and who they say are doing anti-democratic things. At the same time, here's a leftist, leader of a socialist party in their midst who is using utterly, obviously anti-democratic means to stay in power.
I mean, let's start off with the fact that Maduro is about as leftist as Vladimir Putin. They might say they are when it's convenient, but their policies have not looked that way. 2 actual leftists, in more so in Brazil, President Luiz Inácio da Silva Lula, his patience with Maduro has very clearly reached an end. He warned Maduro weeks before the election that his calls of if the election didn't go his way, there would be bloodshed. Maduro said that, and Lula came out strongly against that, said that that's dangerous rhetoric, which obviously it is. Lula has been tested with Maduro's saber rattling in Guyana. They share borders with this third country, and Brazil basically said that they would consider coming to the defense of Guyana if Venezuela were to step in or invade, really. And Brazil, let's remember, is the giant of South America. Their GDP, by population, by geographical size in every sense. They're the giant there. Colombia is a key ally of Venezuela. Now, Colombian President Gustavo Petro, he's been much more reluctant to hit Maduro. He has many more ideological and personal connections to the kind of leftist strains that created Colombian guerrillas and sort of gave permissiveness to the Chavez Maduro regime to be the way it is. So he's been a lot more careful, but through his foreign minister, he has said if Maduro doesn't show the receipts, Colombia will not recognize the election. It is not ideal for Venezuela to be in a neighborhood where its two most important neighbors, two largest neighbors, simply do not recognize the legitimacy of their government. They're really, they're on the highway toward rogue state status. What does that mean? Does that mean the Maduro regime comes toppling down? Well, if you look at the Cuban or North Korean experience, no, it doesn't mean that. It means that the Maduro regime will have absolute control within its borders and probably near zero influence outside of them.
Rafael Bernal, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.